Hey guys, welcome back to Unleashed. I am so glad you're here, and remember, we are the resistance. If this episode speaks to you today, man, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to help support the ministry, you can go to unleashed.men. You can click on the About tab, and then on Donate. I want to tell you something. This podcast, I love doing this. But it costs way more than anything that's ever come in, from proceeds from it. The enemy has whispered in my ear more than one time, Brent, why don't you just stop doing the podcast? I mean, it takes so much time. You're not making as much as it costs to do it. It's not worth it. So why haven't I stopped? And it's because God, every single time, has met my needs. And because I know this podcast is changing lives, it's encouraging men, and it's helping men to be dangerous for good. I'm not going to lay down my sword. I will stay the course. There's a price and a sacrifice to engage in this battle, but I want to tell you there's also a prize. And that prize is when I hear from so many men who have reached out, letting me know every single week just how much that this has helped them just get back up for one more day, to engage, to love well, to keep following God. And for me, honestly, there really is no greater prize. It's kind of like saying sick 'em to a dog. I did have someone this past week make a donation. It wasn't a financial, I guess it kind of would be if you want to look at it this way. Good friend of mine, Tab, drove from hours away to bring some meat for our freezer, as he knew that this was going to be a tough year, with my heart surgery and everything going on. And so he was going to bring me a bunch of different meat. And, God has a way of like showing up in the 11th hour. Here we are, November 24th today. This is a tough year to be able to get out and do any hunting for me. I've been able to get out just a little bit, and God has provided. But he has crazy ways of showing up with his provision, like this, my buddy showing up, and he's like, hey, you got room in your freezer? It's amazing how God just does this. My friend Doug Gert from DG Archery, he also called me up, and he had some deer meat for me from a buck that he'd shot out of state. But the only problem was, when he had called me, we had a little problem just, I think it was Friday of this past week, with our garage freezer. We have a floor freezer, and we also have a combo fridge, / freezer that I was going to put the other meat in that Tab had brought us. He had some caribou, he had some moose, venison, pork, turkey, and 24 hours after he dropped it off, and we got it all put into that freezer, the compressor on the freezer went out. Yeah. So I had to empty out the floor freezer of half of what was in there just to make room for what he brought. I wasn't going to lose that meat. So luckily, what I got rid of was more, the kind of stuff, it was kind of buried probably more toward the bottom of the freezer. It was things like, ice cream, which I really shouldn't be eating anymore since my heart stuff, like fried chicken fingers, outdated meat from a couple of years ago from a bear I'd shot. But the only problem was I couldn't just throw it in the trash because it was Friday. Our trash doesn't go until Tuesday, which is tomorrow. So I had to take one of my hunting camp coolers, one of the really big Coleman's, and fill it with everything that I needed to get rid of. Because if I'd have just thrown it in the trash cans 4 days before our trash goes, the police probably would have been knocking on my door to find out where I hid the bodies. So tonight I'll be taking all that junk out to the trash. I think it's supposed to be pretty cold tonight. I think down into the low 30s, and pray that the trash goes early. Because if it doesn't, the neighbors are going to get a smell of some rotting meat drifting into their homes. I don't think they'll appreciate that a whole lot. But speaking of drifting, that's kind of where I want to head today in today's episode. Because what I want to talk about is like when our prayer life drifts off course. So as I sat down to record this morning, I was in a rush to get this recorded because the check engine light in my wife's car had come on, and she had called me early this morning. It needed to be taken to the dealer. And I let her know that as soon as I was done with recording today, I would come switch vehicles. So as I turn on the microphone to record, the neighbor, November 24th, right? November 24th. The neighbor right behind my studio decides that today is the day he's going to go ahead and start mowing his leaves. not with a riding mower, which, can mulch up the leaves. You can get the yard done pretty quick, but with a push mower with a bagging attachment on it. Now, it's been an hour and he was still mowing. So, I'm getting frustrated. Rather than praying about this, I'm starting to feel the tension. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and start doing some other things. I'll put laundry away this morning that I got, folded downstairs, and I get all that done. I get back up. He finishes mowing, and my dog comes in. She's like laying underneath my legs here as I'm getting ready to record. When you know, a FedEx truck pulls right up and knocks on the front door, which gets the dog barking again. So he leaves. I get everything brought in, and after she calms down, when you know it, a squirrel right outside the window of my studio starts barking at the neighbor, who is now putting away his mower and putting the trash bags out for the truck, which starts the dog barking all over again. So finally, I get that situation stopped. And what happens next? The city decides to test the tornado siren right behind the house. Then, as soon as that stops, I'm just sitting here like, what else can happen? My phone starts dinging with private messages. I start getting emails coming up on I have to minimize everything, close things out so it's not dinging on my computer. Calls start coming in on my phone. This is the kind of thing, honestly, that can cause me to kind of put God last in my day, and it can cause me to drift off course. And if I don't get a grip on this kind of stuff, it can really, really chew away at my emotions, my thoughts, my actions. And as I sat here, I was thinking about, how can I talk to some guys, maybe the guys that I relate to with the outdoorsmen. And I want to start with something I think most outdoorsmen probably can relate to all too well. Have you ever been on one of those hunts where you're going from sun up to sundown, day after day? You're pushing hard, you're hiking hard, glassing, tracking everything. And by about day 3 or 4, after doing miles and packing in and not really getting a whole lot of sleep each night, you are just done. You're exhausted, but you still got like another 4 or 5 days left to camp. So, here you came to chase that buck or that bear or that bull elk or whatever you came to fill the tag with. But then one morning your alarm goes off and you hear it, rain. And you tell yourself, you know what? This might be the perfect morning to catch up on some sleep. So you roll back over, you turn the alarm off, and you go, you know what? I need this. But the problem is, one morning becomes 2. The rain isn't, that hard, but it's an inconvenience, so I think I'd rather stay dry and warm. That got really, really comfy to just kind of sleep in another morning. And like I said, then 2 days becomes 3, and pretty soon the reason that you came to camp, to be successful, to have the pursuit, the adventure, having your heart awakened, which is a big part of it for me. The brotherhood that we have at camp, it just kind of begins to drift out of reach. And it's not because you quit, but it's because you drifted. You chose not to engage. That's exactly how prayer works for so many of us. We don't wake up one morning and decide to stop talking to God. It just kind of happens slowly. Life gets busy, like I just talked about. Work starts to kind of get loud in our life. Our kids need us. My daughter was messaging. She needs me to call her as soon as I'm done with recording after this podcast. Our dreams that we have fill our minds. They begin to distract us. Writing these new books that I'm working on, I can get so focused on creating, and I can begin to drift away from communicating, with the very one who I'm writing about. Our hobbies, different things begin to fill the cracks, and before we know it, those really important conversations with God, the ones that we use to kind of steady and anchor our soul, they get replaced with just kind of quick prayers, at mealtime, or maybe at bedtime, or maybe, like for so many of us, it's when something big happens, like the bottom falls out of something in our life. Like I did my heart surgery, a couple months ago when I told you about how I fell to my knees and cried out to God for 30 straight minutes. And I realized in that moment in prayer that there were some things that I had drifted away from and I hadn't surrendered to God. But when those kind of things happen, it's in those moments that we realize, I'm the one who drifted. It wasn't God. He never moved. And I just kind of let rain keep me in the tent, so to speak. I was thinking about another story. I think it was around 2012, and I was in Alaska with a couple of buddies, and my friend Ralph had a 29-foot fiberglass Bayliner, and he had a big Ford 460 in there, a really powerful engine. And one minute, we're out of Seward, Alaska. We're out in Resurrection Bay. We're about 40 miles out. And one minute we're cruising through deep water, and we're watching these Dall's porpoises, kind of swimming with us, coming out of the water. We're seeing pods of killer whales and humpback whales that are as large as a school bus. And as we're watching all this stuff, just taking it all in one moment, everything stopped. We lost all power. The engine had gone out. Whether we threw a bearing, I can't even remember what it was now, but everything went out. Even our electronic stuff went out. The only thing we had left was a tiny 9-horse, like a trolling, like a kicker motor. And so it was just a kind of enough power. I think we were about 4 miles off this one rocky cliff. There was I think it was called Three-Hole Bay. But it was just enough to get us out of the open ocean because there was a storm that was going to be coming in. And it took us, I don't know how many hours, but to get into this little quiet bay. But it was nowhere near enough power to get us home. And so it couldn't fight, these currents or tides. And it really couldn't steer us to safety. The only thing it kind of helped us do was slowly, and I mean slowly, was make our way into this little safe harbor that I'd said was called Three-Hole Bay. So we anchored up and we waited and we waited and we waited. But here's the kicker. It didn't have to take 6 days, and that's how long it took for us to be found. The problem was we had no PLB. We didn't have a personal locating beacon or device. We had no radio when everything went out. We had no way to communicate with shore. If we'd have had communications, we'd have been found on day one. And that's exactly what drifting from prayer feels like. Because when you stop talking to God, that strong engine in your spiritual life, it just shuts down. You're left running like on that little tiny backup I was talking about. You're running on your own willpower. You're running on your own ideas. You're running on your own strength. And it might get you into a moment of calm, you think, but it will never get you home. And home, getting there, is the point. Prayer is that locator beacon of the soul. It's a lifeline. It's the connection to the one who sees the entire ocean. And the moment that you call out, God knows exactly where you are, and He moves toward you. Yes, God is already in you, but He's not going to force you to talk to Him. So, humility is one of the secrets to getting back close to God. But here's something that I have learned the hard way. Sometimes it feels like God is just kind of slow, right? Or silent after we drift. And it's not because He's distant, but because He cares deeply about this one thing. He cares about trust. And trust requires humility. Sometimes we get so set in our ways that we want control. We are committed to control. We are so convinced that we can muscle our way through life that part of God's mercy is letting us feel what drifting really does to our soul. It's not to punish us, but it's to wake us up, because drifting at sea with no one left to rescue us is often the exact thing that brings us back to the Father. Humility swallows pride. Humility, it opens the heart. Humility says, God, I have been trying to run this myself, and I need you. I desperately need you. And that's the moment that closeness begins to come back. That's when prayer stops feeling like a duty, and it really does start to feel like coming home. I was thinking about David in the Bible. He was a man who drifted. He was a man who hid. He was a man who eventually comes home. But if anyone understood drifting, it was David. This was a man who knew God personally, not religiously, but personally. Relationally, he heard God. He walked with God. He worshiped God with his whole heart. The scriptures say he was a man after God's own heart. But somewhere along the way, David drifts. And this is what happened. He didn't just wake up one morning and decide to kind of blow up his life, right? He kind of drifts into it. Little by little, he stopped guarding his heart. He stops, showing up where kings were supposed to be, like in battle. He stopped talking to God the way that he used to. And in that quiet distance, temptation walks right through this unlocked door of his soul. The man who once ran toward Goliath, the man who worships with abandon, the man after God's own heart, he became the man who reached for something he never should have touched. And once he crossed that line, he didn't pray. What does he do? He goes into cover-up mode, right? He lies, he hides, he manipulates. He even arranged for the man's death, the husband of the woman who he had the affair with, just to bury his sin even deeper and hide it even more. So instead of running to the Father, David goes deeper into the shadows. And for a while, it kind of looked like it worked. Just like rolling over in that warm sleeping bag when that rain's coming down and going, you know what, just for today, I'm going to stay in bed. And it kind of feels harmless. But spiritually, something inside of David was dying. David says it like this in Psalm 32. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away. David wasn't physically sick. He was spiritually dehydrated. And that's what distance from God does to a man. It doesn't just make you weak. It makes you dangerous. Not dangerous for good like I talk about, but dangerous to yourself and everyone else around you, those that you love most. But here was the turning point. The moment David finally prayed, really prayed, everything shifted. I'm not talking about a religious sounding prayer. I'm talking when he prays with everything within him because he knows he has drifted and he can't find his way back. God doesn't shame him. God doesn't abandon him. What does God do? God restores David. Because even when David drifted, God never left. It was David who had drifted. Everything changed the moment that David finally prays. Not from performance, but out of brokenness. Something I've said on here before, does God want us broken? Yeah, he does. But does he want us to stay broken? No. God wants us healed. David writes in Psalm 51, he says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." David didn't say, God, help me fix myself. He said, God, I need you to rebuild what I broke. So what does God do? He answers him with forgiveness and restoration. Because God is not a father waiting to scold you. He is a father that is waiting to hold you. I want to take a minute and just kind of reflect on what we've been talking about. So, guys, drifting, it happens quietly. And it's not necessarily because we're trying to run away. It's not because we want to hide. Hiding takes too much energy and it drains our peace. And it's not because we don't love God. Sometimes, really, it's because life has gotten so busy, like I was just talking about this morning, and we have found ourselves spinning way too many plates. Work, kids, bills, the pressure that's building up from all this stuff. We have goals, expectations from others around us. For me, I'm even thinking about when am I going to find time to work out today? There were twice this last week that I missed my workout. For me, that's a big deal. Maybe it's planning a hunt that's kind of getting in the way of everything. And slowly that still small voice begins to get drowned out until one day it just kind of hits us. I haven't really talked to God honestly in a long time. For some of us, it's busyness. For others, maybe it's shame. Maybe it's that fear of what God will say. But I want you to hear me with this. God doesn't shame you back into his presence. He draws you back. He whispers. He invites. He says, son, come talk to me again. So I want to get honest for a minute. When I think about drifting, I was really hit this morning with areas of my own life, where I have drifted. And not just, where have I drifted, but why have I drifted? So that's kind of what I want to ask you too. Where have you drifted? Why have you drifted? What is keeping you from talking to God honestly? Is it busyness? No, is it shame? Are you avoiding God? Maybe it's a habit that you don't want God touching. Boy, that one can hit home. But when trouble hits, do I say, don't tell Dad? Or do I say, go get Dad, I need him now? So, wow, that's a big one. And have you ever felt like that? It's like when you were a kid and you got in trouble, it's like, don't tell Dad. But when you have a close relationship because you know your father wants the best for you, it's like, no, go get Dad. I need him now. I've told our 16-year-old that if you ever find yourself some night out with some other teenagers and you get yourself in trouble, I don't care what time of the night it is. You don't have to worry about it. You call me and I will be there. I promise not to shame you. Now, will I say, what caused you to think that was the right choice to make? Maybe we can work on that. But I also want them to remember, whatever choices you have made, never forget, Christ in you is your one true identity, and God will never, ever remove that from you because of what you've done. So what I want us to think about this week, this is Monday. If you're getting this today or tomorrow, it's early in the week. I want you to think about finding 10 minutes out of your day. Whatever works best for you. Maybe it's first thing in the morning. I don't know. Maybe you're a person who likes to sleep right up until the alarm. Whatever that looks like, try to find 10 minutes out of your day. But before you really start getting plugged in on your phone, probably the earlier the better, because that's when emails begin coming in, phones begin to ring, mowers begin to get going, sirens begin to blow, dogs are barking. If I would have gotten a better start this morning and not waited until a little bit later, until the last minute, I'd have been far better off. But I let my morning just kind of drift in time when I had set, rather than saying, God, breathe your word into me this morning. So find a way to sit with God, to breathe with God, to talk to your Father. And I'm not saying to do this out of performance. There's no pressure to do it right. But what I'm trying to ask you to do is find a way to be present with God, to stay present in those 10 minutes that you're going to focus in giving him. When I was a young guy, I was probably like 22 years old, 21. I would drive 400 miles home from college, from Anderson, Indiana, all the way back to Rocky Grove, Pennsylvania. And no matter what time of the night that I would get there, I could smell it as soon as I walked in the door. My mother always had a pan that she had made, these sloppy joes she called Wimpies. She had them ready. It was 1 a.m. many times. By the time I would get there, she'd have them ready for me to sit down and eat. She had been waiting for me to come home. Those were the best sandwiches I think I've ever had. And if it's been a long time since you've really prayed honestly, I want you to make this week your week for coming home. God's been waiting. He always does. The 23rd Psalm popped into my head as I was finishing up this week's podcast. And it brought a peace in my life, in the storms, many, many times. And maybe it's just what you're needing to hear right now as you're thinking about refocusing and finding a way to get alone with God and remembering what he has done for you and that he loves and cares about you no matter what. And maybe this is exactly what you need to begin that journey back to the Father. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Father, thank you for being the one who never drifts from us. Father, when I move away, you move toward me. When I hide, you seek me. When I fall, you lift me back up. Teach me to talk to you again, honestly simply, consistently. Remind me that I don't have to clean myself up to come to you. Lord, restore my heart the way you restored David's. Make prayer my lifeline and not my last resort. Draw me again, Father, closer to you. I want to hear your voice. I want to walk with you. And I want to trust you with everything. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Guys, if this message hits home with you, share it with someone who's ready to reconnect with God. Listen to it again if you need to hear these words again. Remember that God has equipped you with everything you will ever need. So reach out and talk to the one who knows you, who has called you by name. And remember this, that when a man knows who he is in Christ, that he's been created in the image of the living God, when he's no longer held captive by the opinions of others or cares whether he lives or dies, that man is extremely dangerous. Dangerous for good, because he's been unleashed. We'll see you next time.